Hey everybody, Eric with Solobox. So today I'm out in the shop. You can see I've got my work cut out for me. So I recently made some changes to how the Pannier frames are being produced. The old way of producing them was just way too time consuming, and I've known for a long time that the way I was doing things was just taking way too long. As an example, it would usually take me about 3 solid work days to be able to build 8 sets of frames, and that's just way too long. And the real issue with that is that there's just so many little tiny steps that go into building them. I enjoy working with the steel, but it just takes way too long. And so there were some things that I really wanted to be able to change. And so one of those things is this is a GM shroud retainer. I've been using these, 4 of them on each frame for years, to create a little bit of separation between the frame and the box, so that the backs of the boxes and the frame itself don't get scratched up. And so the problem with that, actually, here's a bunch of them. Here's what's left of them. I'm not using these anymore. Problem is, they're just super expensive. I was sourcing these at Fastenal and paying like $13 a box for a box of 50 of these, and that's just ridiculous for what they actually are. As an example, there's a lot more plastic that goes into one of these, and this doesn't cost nearly per part what it costs for these. So those have been discontinued, and what I've gone to instead is a way of separating it by using a washer with a nut tacked onto the back of it. And so this actually creates a little bit of separation. It's raised above the frame so that they won't rub. This is how the old style was done. It was an extra hole that had to be drilled all the way through the frame, and then this 1/4-inch nut had to be tack welded onto the back of it. So I have now, with the new design, I've eliminated 5 holes per frame side. I mean, when you're building 8 sets of these, that's 16 sides, 16 times 5. That's a lot of holes. Every single one of those holes has to be laid out. They've got to be center punched. They've got to be pre-drilled, and then they've got to be drilled to the proper size. And then to top it all off, when I get everything back from powder coating, I still have to do all the assembly work of this, and I have to keep these in stock and pay for them. So that has been changed. I wasn't real sure as to exactly how I wanted to change it. I initially started out, here's a V-Strom, a Generation 2 V-Strom frame. I started out, I tried doing 1 up at each corner. These are both threaded M8. And actually how my frames used to be built before I started doing the plastic puck that rides down here was, I was doing 1 at each corner all the way around, and there was no quick release about it. So I built a couple of V-Strom sets in this batch. I did it this way, but I also built some KLR stuff, and I think I've settled for this is exactly how I'm going to do it. It's just not required to have 1 at each corner. It does make the frame stronger by gusseting the corners like this, but it's just not called for. In 8 years, I've had so few frame failures that the frames are really strong, actually, so it's just not really called for. Yeah, technically it's stronger, and it's also stronger because it doesn't have a bunch of holes drilled in it anymore either. So this is how you can look forward to seeing these done from now on. And it's just nice because these washers, I buy these in bags of 100. They're already pre-made. And so that saves me a bunch of time from having to make, I used to have to, every time I wanted to build this little part on a frame, let me show you how this is done. This is a little tiny square piece, and I had to make this square piece 1 at a time like this. So it'd have to be cut, it had to be laid out with an X, it had to be center punched, had to be pre-drilled, and then drilled to the proper size, and then final drilled after it comes out of the jig to the next size up from that, which gives it a little leeway so it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, and it'll still fit everybody's bike. So the time taken to build this piece is just, it's insane. It's been replaced with this. They're pre-made, so it's pretty brilliant. And yeah, it's a round piece being welded onto a piece of square stock, but you know what? All of these welds end up getting ground down anyways. And so here's one that's been ground down. It looks nice and square. So I'm really glad that I switched to doing it this way. This is going to speed things up by quite a bit. So here's one where the nut has been tacked onto it and it's basically ready to be turned into a piece. And so that would sit down in there and just get welded into place. Much, much more quick. So another change that I've made, this is Juan, the bandsaw. He has gone into early retirement. This saw blade, it's really easy to make this square in this direction and get a real square cut. The problem is, as this is coming down through the piece, this tends to flex. So it's square in one direction, but it can end up slightly off in the other. And so what I've done is I bought a cold cut saw. This is about a $500 saw. Don't confuse this saw with a, what do you call them? The big disc saws. Those things are relatively cheap. This is a really expensive saw. Big difference is that this runs at a lot lower RPM. And man, I really wish I'd made that change sooner. Basically, what I've been doing is I've been trying to cut steak with a butter knife. Man, huge difference. This cuts through steel like boom, it's done. It's also at a much better working height. I got this stand which folds up. I got this at Harbor Freight. It's really cheap, but the legs fold up and this can be parked out of the way whenever it's not being used. I also came up with this really interesting system for a lot of the cuts that I have to make over and over. So this pin fits down in here. I make this cut a million times. It's like 1.25 inches or something. Makes a lot of the pieces that go into the frames, the rear crossbars, yada, yada, yada. By building this as a stop, set this to where it's square, run your stock through this way, bumps up against it, boom, cut, cut, cut. They just fall on the floor and you pick them up. Way, way faster than the bandsaw. Literally, the time it'd take to make one of those on the bandsaw, I probably am making about 3 of them on here, maybe even 4. Got a couple other spots that are already set up on here. Basically, this is set up here to do the riser piece on all of the frames, and the other notch is for the horizontal piece. And so I cut a lot of those, and it's nice because I can just be feeding stock through here and bam, 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 be making cuts. Another nice feature on this saw is that you can slide it in and then set this and do your final set to hold it into place. I've also found this is a lot more accurate when it comes to setting the angle. I can use an angle finder and set the angle so much better than I could on the other one. And it's also a lot faster to set the angle. To set the angle on that machine, I had to use a wrench to do it. And you know, that's just part of why the frames are so time consuming, because every time I need a different angle for each and every little tiny piece, I was having to screw with that and make all kinds of cuts. With this, to set an angle, you set it where you want it, this comes across, it's locked into place. It's got a little meter right here that tells you where you're at. Probably won't really be using this, but it's nice that it's there. So the accuracy of the cuts has just gone way up, and the speed of the cuts has gone way up. I thought this saw would be really loud. It's not. It's not bad at all. It's still louder than the bandsaw, but I was under the impression that this type of saw would really be super loud, and it's just not. So anyway, that's really what has changed in here in terms of the frames. I'm going to go ahead and finish assembling these, get them wrapped up and ready to go, and then I'm going to jump into getting these boxes ready to go out. I've got a lot of people waiting. So anyway, Eric with Cellabox. I'll talk to you later.